Hey everyone, this is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row. Thanks so much for listening to the following broadcast, courtesy of Public House Media.
This is Liz Colburn, host of the Morning Uplift and Motivational Mantras here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come over and check out my shows, The Morning Uplift and The Motivational Mantras. The Morning Uplift airs on Monday mornings every single week, and it's a show that really tries to help start your morning with the motivation that you need to get through your week. The Motivational Mantras has a guest speaker on every other week, which shines light on their life story and helps us to find the beauty in our journey. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Morning Uplift and Motivational Mantras. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. Find more about me at my website, danielpoppie.com. Poppie is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E. If you have not yet followed this podcast, you can check out on Facebook and you can look up How to Write Good. You can type it into the search bar and you can click like and you automatically follow if you like something if you don't know about that with Facebook already. And then you'll get updates on when this podcast comes out and what each week. And then you can like it and different things like that. If you do like this podcast, please do share it, or at the very least like it when it comes out on Facebook or wherever it comes out, or give it a good review if you enjoy it, because that is always helpful. So we've made it to week 3. You, my one listener, and myself have made it to week three, so that is good. The word of the week, before I start the word of the week, I just want to share what my thoughts are this week about this, because right now I'm in the beginning stages of this podcast, and I'm just going to be completely honest. I'm going to try to essentially just tell you exactly what I think about things. I'm in the 3rd week of this podcast, so I don't have everything completely figured out. This is a thing that's new to me. And as I go through things, I'm starting to wonder the exact setup I should have. What should be included in these podcasts? There's part of me that wants to do interviews on a semi-regular basis. Not every podcast, but some podcasts do interviews with authors and other people who would be informative to talk to about different areas related to writing and storytelling and anything else you can think of. And in my thinking this week, I started to think, should I do word of the week? I mean, would people actually like the word of the week? Because it may come across like they're in school. It's like, oh, there's the word of the week. Why do I really need to know this? I don't really want to know this. Some of you may love the word of the week. I don't know why, but you may love it. And as I started to think, I was like, well, why do I want to do this? And I'm going to keep the word of the week, at least for now, and probably pretty far into the future because of this reason. And the reason is because I really, really like words. I really do. It's weird. I don't know why. I like words. I like how they look. I like how they sound. I like the meanings behind them. I like the etymology of words. If you don't know what that word means, it means how the word came to be, came into existence, and the past meanings of the words and different things like that. So me sharing the word of the week with you is sharing my love of words with you. So bear with me if you don't like it. And if you do like it, that's awesome. So the word of the week is chagrin, and the reason I chose this word is because I see it a lot in writing, and I hear it a lot in movies. No, I don't hear it a lot in movies, but I see it a lot in writing, and I never knew exactly what it meant. So I was playing that game of context clues where you read something and you think you know what it means for years and years and years. And about a week ago, I ran into the meaning of this word. I think I was looking it up. I don't remember exactly. And I'm like, that's not what I thought it meant at all. So I'm going to share it with you because maybe there's an off chance that you didn't know what it meant at all. And if you did know what it meant, then you can be like, man, you're dumb. But whatever. So chagrin means strong feelings of embarrassment. And that's what it is. And I didn't know exactly what I thought it meant before, but it was not strong feelings of embarrassment. It was something else. All right, we are going to jump straight into accidental essence. And our question of this week is, what is logic? And I think the reason why, well, I know the reason why I'm having this is because at the end of my shows, I'm going to have a different logical fallacy for as long as logical fallacies exist, or for as long as I have logical fallacies to talk about. I'm going to try to go through every one, or at least every major one, because we may be splitting hairs too much if we go through every single one. And by we, I mean me, not you, because you're not going through them. What am I talking about? All right. So I think that if I'm going through logical fallacies at the end of my show, I need to address logic at some point in the show, because first, I think that most people try to think logically. But second, I think that even though people try to think logically, they don't necessarily realize that logic is a system that's been historically been built up and has a specific way of thinking through something. Man, that was really bad. Logic is a specific system with specific steps that it's better if you follow those steps and there's specific rules. And we even have this huge, vast body of logical fallacies that connect back to this system. So I'm presenting this because I think that most people actually don't know what this is. And if you are someone who does, because I know that at least someone who's listening to this probably has a better grasp on logic than me, I pray to God. But I think that most people don't. I think that most people think of logic as something, but they don't think of what it actually is, what it's traditionally been known to be. And I think it's more beneficial for you to know what it's traditionally been known to be and know the steps. I feel like I'm stumbling over everything, but whatever. And know the steps of logic so that you can apply them in your life, because I think that thinking clearly is better for the world. I think it's better for you. I think it'll improve your life. You may not want to apply it when you are talking to your significant other, but that's a different situation. So, I'm going to jump right in. I was going to do this differently, but I'm just going to explain what logic is. I'm going to go through the steps of logic so that you can just get an understanding. And then I may get into some claims. I am already at the 6-minute mark, but we are going to see if I have enough time to make some claims about logic so I can at least express to you what I think about it and how important I think it is in your thinking. So logic is a system of thought that seeks to present order and order. Logic is a system of thought that seeks to present and order the phenomena of thought and reality in a way that best represents how reality actually is. Or, if you want a faster definition, maybe not a better definition, but a quicker definition to remember, logic tries to think about the world as it actually is. I think that's easy to see. And I would say there's a heavy emphasis on the thought aspect of that, of course. And if you don't understand what I mean by this, I think it's fairly accurate. I think it's fairly easy to understand what I mean by this. But if you don't, think of it as being related to mathematics. With mathematics, you want to best represent the world using numbers. Or if you're in algebra, you want to use letters for whatever reason. But in mathematics, you want to best represent the world using numbers. So if something is 36 meters long, you want to be like, hey, this is 36 meters long. You don't suddenly say, this is 40 meters long. You say, no, this is 30. You want to be as accurate as possible as a general rule. In the same way, logic seeks to represent the world as clearly as possible as well. So if I am dead, I am not also living in the same sense. So if I'm dead, I'm not also living. Now, someone might be like, well, if you believe in the afterlife, you're still living. But that's different. That's a different sense of being dead. If I'm dead, as we think of dead here on Earth, then I am no longer living. It doesn't jive, if you can say it that way. I never used that word. I don't know why I'm using that word now, but it doesn't jive. So you may think that you use logic every single day, and I'm sure that you do use a systematic way of thinking. And I think that you probably do use a systematic way of thinking that in some way mimics logic, but you probably don't actually use logic as it's been put together by philosophers in history and by great thinkers in history. And I wouldn't be presenting this to you if this was just my thoughts, because I'd probably be like, well, if this is just my thoughts, then this isn't probably very good, because I'm essentially trying to convince you to adopt this way of thinking to make your life better. And if it was just me who came up with this way of thinking, I wouldn't have a lot to go on. So I guess I'm going to jump into the steps of logic. And I don't remember if I said this before, but it's likely that you have some system of thought that you use for thinking. And you may say, oh, well, I think logically. And if you do know formal logic, it's likely that you think more logically than I do, which isn't saying much. But if you know formal logic, it's almost certainly the case that you think better than I do. But for those of you who have never actually gone in a class or been in a class where they teach logic, then I think that it's going to be beneficial for you, because you're going to suddenly be like, this is really simple. They should teach this to sixth graders. They should really teach this to sixth graders, because I think if sixth graders can understand math, if you have eighth graders, I'm jumping over to eighth graders now. If you have eighth graders who are jumping into algebraic equations, they definitely can understand logic. I think that logic is simpler than math, and I think that it actually logic is required to use math. Actually, logic, think of it like this. So logic is a foundation, and on top of this foundation, you have mathematics and science. All right. And I think those two are siblings. Logic is the parent of those two, because without logic, it doesn't make sense. Again, when I was talking about logic, I was saying we're best trying to represent reality. We're best trying to see reality as it is. That means that with science, that makes a lot of sense, because with science, we have a claim. And with that claim, we try to build this evidence to support that claim. That's a very logical thing. We want to see reality as it is, and we show, oh, here's one thing that shows it. Here's another thing that supports my claim. With mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4, and it's logical to see that. It's almost difficult to talk about. It's so self-evident that 2 + 2 = 4, especially to adults, but it's logical. It's not a logical thing to say 2 + 2 = 5, because I even can see that, oh, I have 2 here, I have 2 here. When I count, I get up to 4. Now, I know that there are people in math who do proofs to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. So they do a proof that's page upon page that goes through step by step why 1 + 1 = 2. But I would even argue that in math, those steps have to make sense. Those steps have to be logical, else it's not going to work. Continuing along, I'm going to get to the steps of logic. I'm taking a little longer, but I just want to talk a little bit more about it. And then we're going to lead up to that joyous moment, that wonderful moment where I explain what logic is to you, and then the light bulb goes on into your mind, and you're like, Dan, you changed my life forever. Or you can just be like, that was really lame. One of the two. It's going to be one of the two. There is no middle ground in how you react to this episode and what I'm explaining. So I think that logic is superior to math. I think it's superior to science. It's the parent of the two. Now, some people would be like, well, I think in an artistic way, or I think in a way that in relation to music. And what I believe is that there is a part of reality that in us, in humans, that is emotional. And I think that recognizing that part of reality and responding to it is actually a logical thing, because as I was going back to what I was using as a definition of logic, it's a system of thought that tries to best represent reality. So if emotions are in reality, then emotions are part of reality, and we want to understand emotions as best as we're able to. And there's even a whole field that seeks to do this. It's called psychology. Psychology wants to understand emotions. It also wants to understand every other part of you. It wants to understand the human being in a systematic and logical way. So there you go. But some people may say, well, when I create music, I know some musicians. I know some good musicians, actually, surprisingly. They don't make anything, but they should, because they're too good not to. But they with music and arts, I think that there are things in us that don't make sense logically. There are emotions in us that don't follow logically. For instance, I think that I mentioned this before. I deal with a lot of anxiety, and anxiety isn't necessarily logical in my life. But in my life, I've been able to channel that anxiety into writing, and I've been able to channel that anxiety maybe into creating a podcast. I don't know if it has anything to do with that, because I don't think it actually helps my anxiety to create a podcast, but oh well. But I'm using that, and I'm directing myself in a very logical way to try to take care of that in my life, and I'm directing myself in a very logical way to create something using that. So even if emotions, even if fears, and different areas of our lives that aren't logical, or different areas of being human beings aren't logical, we still talk about it and we still create things using those aspects of ourselves in a logical way. So we use the illogical and turn it into something logical. If I have a lot of fear in my life and I use that to write a book, that book took a lot of thought, a lot of thinking. It may not necessarily be true. It may not necessarily follow the rules of our world, but it still has to make sense to other people. It still has to be presented in a way that fits into this logical model to make sense. If I'm talking about, I'm going to get into the logical model in a second, but this may touch on it a bit. If I'm talking about love in my book, and I'm not if I never explain what it is in my book, then no one's going to ever know what I exactly mean. I will know what I exactly mean, what no one else is going to, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In the same with music, we use this logical framework. We parse apart the problems in our lives and we create something using it. And I think that without logic, we wouldn't be able to create it. And I'm sorry if I'm unable to articulate this well. I often think that I stumble over this because, as I was saying before, logic is something so much a part of it that when I talk about it, I talk in circles. I feel like I just say the same thing over and over again because it seems to me so self-evident. And I'm just like, well, this is what it is. And I just begin to talk in circles about it. So I'm gonna actually jump into what it is. And here it is. So logic is a system of thought, and it's broken up into 3 steps. And this is pretty much what it is. There's probably more to it, and there's bound to be somebody who's listening to this who says, no, you've got it completely wrong. And there's bound to be someone who says, well, you didn't explain it well enough. But I'm giving it my best shot orally. So as I'm speaking, I'm talking about it the best way I'm able to while speaking out loud. I probably could write about it a lot better because it's not as fast and I don't have to think on my feet as much. But whatever. And I'm talking way too much right now, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to get to why you're here, because I know that everybody loves logic and everybody wants to hear this. And nobody really wants to hear my voice right now. They just want to hear that content. They need that content. So the first step of logic is definitions. And if you're someone who has taken philosophy and you say, no, it's not definitions, I'm simplifying it. I'm simplifying it so people can remember. Okay? So even if it's called something else, I'm calling it definitions. So chill out. The first step of logic is definition. So what I'm doing is I'm defining what I see or what I'm thinking about or what I'm talking about. Okay? So if I am talking about a flower to someone, I am going to define what a flower is or I need to have an understanding of what a flower is in my mind. If I'm talking to someone about a flower and I actually think a cucumber is a flower and that other person thinks a flower is a flower, we didn't define that term. All right. In the same way, if I'm talking about love, it's important to actually say what that is. If I'm talking about hate, what is that? If I'm talking about God, what do I mean by that? If I'm talking about infinite, what do I mean by that? Most of the time you can say, most of the time people will probably disregard this because they say, well, I don't really need to define what I'm talking about, but I think that you especially should when you're talking about things in the abstract. So define what you're seeing, define what you're saying. Ask people what they mean when they use a specific word. So definitions, that's the first step. Definitions, want to know what it is. And this is the most important step, and I think this is the step that people do not do in their lives. I think they just take for granted what they think they know. So I think that if you're trained to do this, you do it a lot more, and I think that if you've been exposed to it, you do it a lot more. But if you don't believe me, try it out. And I'm gonna say that again and again. If there's something that I say and you're like, no, that's a bunch of crap, I really don't think that's gonna work, just try it out for a week. For a week, actually stop and think about what you're thinking about. Sounds weird. Actually be like, well, what does that mean? What do I mean by that? And it's probably going to clear up your thinking a lot, because I think this is the step people skip. The second step. So the first step is definitions. The second step is claims. If you've ever been in school, you probably run into this. And all claims is saying something about something. So I could say that mankind is good. All right? I could say that mankind is evil. Each of those have different meanings. Now, of course, I need to define things first. So I need to define mankind. I need to define evil. I need to define good. And any other big term I'm using, I need to explain what those things are before going on. But the second step is claims. First step, definition. Second step, claims. Third step is the argument. And this is not an argument as in I'm fighting with you. This is an argument as in I'm putting together a string of claims to come up with a conclusion. The most famous argument, it's got to be the most famous argument, is Socrates is a man. All men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. So the first claim is Socrates is a man. Second claim is all men are mortal. The conclusion of this argument is Socrates is mortal. Pretty simple, right? It's logical. It seems very logical, huh? So that is where I'm going to leave you with logic. I'm going to just check to see. I have so much written down. Some things in my head just have tons of stuff with them, and I was going to be very logical and go step by step through this like a logical argument, but I figured that would be really boring to you, and I think it's more beneficial to you to know what this is and to actually just try applying it in your life, because I think that you'll begin to say, oh, this actually really helps. This is something that really benefits my life and my thinking. So I'm going to leave you with that instead of going into different areas or different claims and trying to argue them logically. And by argue, I'm going back to my definition there. By argue, I mean a logical argument. I don't mean fighting with someone or trying to fight with someone. All right. And now we are going to jump into the logical fallacy of the week. So I essentially had an episode today where I explained why I did the logical fallacy of the week. And it was explaining logic, of course, but I thought I had to do it as I was saying before. The logical fallacy of the week is appeal to stone. Now, I forgot to do this the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to do it this week, and I'm going to do it from here on out for the logical fallacy of the week. I'm always going to give you the English definition or the English term that's used, the English name of the fallacy, but there always are these there's always Latin names of these fallacies, and I think they're cool, so I'm going to include them as well. So appeal to stone or argument ad lapidem. Argument ad lapidem. I have no idea what lapidem means. It's probably stone. So what argument or what appeal to stone means is dismissing a claim as absurd without demonstrating it is absurd, okay? So when someone says something, when someone makes a claim, we're going back to claims. Isn't that cool? Now you have that connection. It's so cool. So I was saying, you have the steps. The first step is definition. Next step is claim. The third step is argument. It fits in there. The logical fallacy has a term we use, which is really cool, that claim. So it's dismissing a claim as absurd without demonstrating its absurdity. And I am bringing this up because I think that this is something that happens if you don't know someone, or if you don't often hear someone's argument, or if you don't hear the other side of something. And I think it happens with everything. So if you don't know someone who's arguing something against you and you don't realize they have an argument, then you begin to assume that they're just crazy. And so it could be that someone says, it is ridiculous to believe in God. In the same way, it may be the case that someone's saying it is ridiculous not to believe in God. And both of those are appeal to stone. Okay, they're just saying, this is ridiculous. It's ridiculous to believe this thing, and I'm not even going to think about it. I'm not even going to give it the time of day. I'm just going to say, forget about it. I think that instead of just saying that something is absurd, we should assume that people actually have reasons for what they think. Now, that being said, it might not actually be the case that everyone you know has a reason for what they think, but I think it's a better rule of thumb for us. I think it's a better way to start, because first of all, if someone else has a good reason for what they think, you're going to try to have a better reason for what you think. And you may change your own mind if you think, that person just doesn't think that because they're just dumb. They actually have reasons. They've actually thought something through. And it probably is the case that every single claim, like every single philosophical stance, every single moral stance, every single worldview stance, likely has at least one person with an argument for it. And we should, at the very least, hear that person out and assess their argument, whether it's good. That's why I think knowing logic is so important, because when I know logic, I can assess if that argument is good, and I can actually think about the argument more logically as well. So I'm using logic a lot in here. Logic is going to be probably a theme that I'm going through, but just don't assume that people have no reason for what they think. Okay? Because if you do, I've seen this before, actually. It hasn't happened to me. It hasn't happened to me probably because I worry too much about what people think. So I'm like, oh, I've got to figure out what they're thinking. I've got to actually come up with a reason for what I think. But I've seen this happen where two people are talking, and one of the people thinks the other person's premises or claims, let's just use that word because it's the logic term. One person thinks the other person's claim is absurd, and then the other person brings up really good reasons and really good argumentation, brings up a very logical argument, and the first person just looked like an idiot. The person who thought his argument was absurd just looked like an idiot. So at the very least, do not assume someone's argument or someone's claim is idiotic just for yourself, so you don't look like an idiot or you don't look like a fool. So we are at the end. I've got a few things to say in relation to what I talked about last week, both things last week. So I talked about, if you don't remember, because I have a short memory, you have a short memory, we all have short memories. Last week we talked about dealing with pain, personal pain, and I don't know why I say we, it's a weird thing. I talked about dealing with personal pain and how it's good for you, and I also talked about writer's block and strategies for dealing with writer's block and what writer's block is. And today I want to focus on something that you may think is a little contradictory, and that's boredom. What I want to focus on, oftentimes people say, well, if you're bored, you're a boring person. I don't necessarily think that's true. I've said that in the past, but I don't necessarily think that it's true that you're a boring person if you're bored. But I think that you should be bored. I think that you should be bored. And this is why. So we are always on our phones. A lot of people are always on their phones. So for me, I think it's easier. It's more young people. So I'm just going to say it. Millennials and probably younger generations are on their phone. I mentioned my first week that young people, millennials, have a really high suicide rate. And there's a book out that's about the generation below millennials, where they are growing up later, and they have more depression, or they have more negative feelings about things like depression and anxiety. And they are also they're growing up later, they're more isolated, they're less prepared for the world. And the reason why they are is because they're on their phone. I think it's called iGen or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Check it out if you want to. But millennials, we also go on our phones a lot. So when nothing is happening, or we're in a situation where we don't want to be in the situation, we go on our phones. I know people who have gone on their phone. They start acting like they're talking on their phone to not deal with situations, which is kind of ridiculous. You're an adult. Deal with the situation you're in. Seriously. And I can say that about myself as well. I think there's likely a situation where I've been in where I'm just going to go on my phone because it's easier. But I think people are doing this, and I think a lot of millennials are realizing that phones aren't the best. They're a double-edged sword, meaning that they're really good and they're also really bad in some ways. But I think that not just getting off your phone, but just being done and just sitting and doing nothing is important, especially if you're a creative person, because I think that sitting and doing nothing, it's boredom and it's pain. So it goes back to that idea of pain, and you should just deal with your boredom, because eventually your mind starts to wander. And I think that in your mind wandering, you start to come up with ideas, especially if you're a creative person. You start to come up with ideas that are creative and innovative, and you wouldn't have necessarily come up with them if you're constantly just pouring information into your mind. You're constantly on your phone. You're constantly occupying your time. So I think that you should have boredom in your life. So I've got a couple minutes, and I'm just going to take this to talk about one more thing that I'm going to say it really quickly, because it's really a thanks. It's really a thanks to millennials specifically. Millennials, you are you often, and I'm a millennial too, so I can say thanks to myself, you often get told that you suck. And I think it's just a characteristic of reality of human society where the older generations always say the younger generation is awful. You may be awful in some ways, and you certainly probably are awful in some ways. I'm not talking about that today. Again, I'm a millennial. I think there's certain areas of millennials as a whole group, not every single one, but as a whole group where there's probably some criticism that's warranted. Now, maybe that's due to the fact that we are younger and we just need to grow up. And once we grow up, it'll be fine. But one area where I think millennials have it right is that they really like small businesses. They really like small businesses. So I thank you, first of all, because millennials don't necessarily want to be force-fed, or they don't want to take in the big corporate information. So they don't necessarily want to listen to music that is mass-produced and spread on the radio. Most people I know who are my age listen to music that other people don't know. There's actually a lot of people my age who seek out music that other people don't know and try to find bands that are smaller because they like that. They like that exclusivity that nobody else knows about the bands they listen to. They also, I think, like smaller businesses. They like mom and pop shops. I like mom and pop shops because I think they're more personal. But one area they exceed everywhere else is the fact that they really, really like craft beer. And thank you, because I really like craft beer because it's exploded, and I think it's because of millennials. So if you like craft beer, it's certainly not the beginning of craft beer. There's been craft beer companies in the past, but I bet you that the reason why there are just so many of them and they're doing so well is because millennials don't want to drink that crappy beer that tastes like water. Okay, they want to drink something that is unique, and they want to drink something that is good. And if you think that crappy beer that tastes like water is good, you're lying. You don't actually know what good beer is. Okay, so that is all I have for you today. My name is Daniel Poppie. Again, you can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. Please follow How to Write Good on Facebook, and if you follow How to Write Good, you'll always see when different episodes come up. I will be posting that. If you want to go straight to the source, you can always follow Public House Media. That's the company that hosts me, and support them as well. You might find another show that you really like that they put out. This is a niche market, in my opinion. I believe that this area I'm doing is a very niche market, and there's other areas that are not so niche markets, sports. And if you like something, if you like one of these shows, or if you like this show in general, please share it, because that's really helpful to me. Share it on Facebook, like it on Facebook, but definitely share it on Facebook if you like it. So again, I am Daniel Poppie, and I will see you next week on How to Write Good.